set watchmen upon thy walls, O Jerusalem. They shall never hold their peace, day nor night. Ye that are Jehovah's remembrancers, take ye no rest, and give him no rest, till he establish, until he make Jerusalem a praise in the earth. Go through the gates, prepare ye the way of the people. Cast up the highway, gather out the stones, lift up an ensign for the peoples. Behold, Jehovah hath proclaimed unto the end of the earth. Say ye to the daughter of Zion, behold, thy salvation cometh. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. And they shall call them the holy people, the redeemed of Jehovah. And thou shalt be called, sought out, a city not forsaken.
We are currently living in a time when everyone is calling the Ashkenazi Jews
descended from an ancient Turkic civilization.
The Khazar theory. Khazar's origin story. The Khazars. The Khazar theory. Khazarians. Khazars King Bulan origin story.
But are in fact Khazars.
So the claim of the Ashkenazi Jews today is that they are genetically connected to the people of the Middle East or people of Levant. Now, the very first mention that I would have with that is we do a terrible job at reading scripture. We have done a terrible job of explaining how the scripture is laid out because we have fallen in line with linguists who have given us a story or painted a picture for us based on language. But if we go off of scripture tells us that the people of the Middle East are not the people of Shem. I want to take a look at this paper, The Genomic History of the Bronze Age Southern Levant. We found that both Arabic-speaking and Jewish populations are comparable with having more than 50% Middle Eastern-related ancestry. This does not mean that any of these present-day groups bear direct ancestry from people who lived in the Middle to Late Bronze Age Levant or in Chalcolithic Zagros. Rather, it indicates that they have ancestries from populations whose ancient proxy can be related to the Middle East. This statement is not saying that the Ashkenazi Jews have ancestry with those people in the Middle East. This is saying that the current populations that live there that are actually brother and sister clades, Arabic speaking, and populations that are deemed to be Jewish because of the language that they speak. These are the populations that they're saying have more than 50% Middle Eastern related ancestry. The Zagros or Caucasian related ancestry flow into the region apparently continued after the Bronze Age. We also see an Eastern African related ancestry entering the region after the Bronze Age with an approximate south to north gradient. In addition, we observe a European-related ancestry with the opposite gradient of north to south. So the Zagros and Caucasian, again, you got to look at the terminology. When we look at Caucasian today, we automatically think European. But in this case, Caucasian is referring to the inhabitants of the Caucasus Mountains. So it's saying that the people of the Zagros Mountains and Caucasus Mountains ancestry flow into the region, and it continues after the Bronze Age. Now, I believe that the Caucasus is the northernmost part to the land of Canaan. That's why this gene flow is going in and out from before and since the Bronze Age. As far as the European related ancestry, it shows that this DNA is coming in from the north to the south. It's not spreading out, it's not coming up from the lower parts of the Arabian Peninsula. It's not coming from the west, where they believe that North Africans have European DNA. It's not coming from the east, where the Asians. No, this DNA, European related ancestries, come strictly from north to south, meaning these people have entered into this territory. They are not the natural inhabitants of this territory. This paper shows that the European Jews are not Middle Eastern. So Europe has always had this coming into and leaving out of the Middle East. So where do these Jews come from? Because they're not Khazars, they're not Middle Eastern people. Where do they come from? Chassidim, Jews in Poland, 17 through the 1800s. Frank-Mendelssohn. From the times of the Maccabees, if not earlier, to those of the impostor Safardi Sevi, rabbinism had prevailed in the Jewish church. The only opposition had come from the Karaites, of whom we have already spoken, and they were but a small sect commanding little influence. So the Karaites were Jews who were against the rabbins because the rabbins used the Talmud, and the Karaite Jews were strictly Bible. They were strictly Torah. They didn't like to deviate. The followers of Safardi Sevi formed themselves into a distinct sect, calling themselves Jews indeed, and professing the principal doctrines of the Jewish faith, but differing from it, at the same time in the most essential particulars. It says his followers, as we may have seen, were not alienated on apostasy or undeceived joy by his death. One prophet rose after another, who formed his own theological system, resembling Sabbatheism in the general outline, but having a peculiar and distinctive feature of its own. Most of these secured, during their lifetime, at all events, a large and enthusiastic following, while in some instances their teaching was adopted as a rule of faith long after they had passed away from earth. Among these prophets, two of the most remarkable were Malik and Hajan. These men were two rabbins belonging, the one to a Polish, the other to a German synagogue. This is significant because these two groups make up the Ashkenazi Jewish sect of Judaism. Amongst the doctrines preached by Hajan was that of a trinity of gods, though the three were perfect in their unity. This dogma, very nearly coinciding, if not identical, with the Catholic doctrine of the Trinity he professed to find in the book of Zohar. And another and more important sect, appearing at least to derive its origin from Sabbatheism, is that of the Chassidim, which established itself chiefly in Poland, Galatia, and Russia. This is, according to a well-known writer of the present day, the religion of nearly all the Jews in Galatia, Hungary, southern Russia, and Wallachia. Its founder was one Israel Bel Shem, who first appeared in Podolia in 1740. He claimed to be the representative of God on earth, and as such, his commands were to be obeyed with implicit submission. His early history is full of fable, wild, extravagant tales being told of it, which are unworthy of repetition. The Orthodox rabbins say he was a man of mean rank and extraction, possessed of no real ability, and who affected sanctity and mystery in order to impress his followers. His certain supernatural power was invariably claimed by the students of Kabbalism, but those assumed by Israel had apparently no limit. He could absolve from all sin, he could cure all diseases by his simple command, he could work the most stupendous miracles, he was endowed with all knowledge, not only of the past, but of the future also. The main drift of his teaching, which entirely rejected the Talmud as a rabbinical tradition, was the necessity of learning by continual contemplation and self-mortification the true nature of God, and also of entire submission to the Tzaddikim, or priesthood. This isn't only writing about the Chassidim. And as you can see, it says it's a paper read before the Jews College Literary Society, November 13th, 1887. The founder of the sect was one Israel Bel Shem, and the story of his parentage, birth and childhood, and the current anecdotes of his subsequent career play a considerable part in Chassidic literature. The sayings and doings of Bel Shem are an essential, perhaps the most essential, portion of any account of the sect. For Bel Shem is the center of the Chassidic world, and Chassidism is so intimately bound with the personality of its founder that any separation between them is well nigh impossible. The Chassidim Bel Shem is not a man who established a theory or set forth a system. He himself was the incarnation of a theory, and his whole life the revelation of a system. Even those portions of his history which are plainly legendary have their uses in indicating the ideals and in illustrating the aspirations of the early Chassidim. We know slavery started 1500, 1501, and here we see that 1700, a different sect of Jews arose. When the Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal and all other European territories, they were running and finding different places where they could hide. It's not a far-fetched understanding to believe that there were Jewish sects, S-E-C-T, in Poland. The name Ashkenaz comes from the territory. Southern Russia, if I'm not mistaken, Germany, those places are considered to be the lands of Ashkenaz. If we go back to this book, The History of the Jews, if we look at the table of contents, we can see that the Jews were everywhere in Europe. They ran everywhere they could possibly go in Europe, even specifically in Poland, as we read already. So when we look at this history of the Jews, they were being persecuted at every turn, and it was no secret. 1800s in England, the Jews were not naturalized, could not possess land, could not hold any public office of whatsoever kind, were not in any real sense English citizens. Yet it was evident they regarded themselves as permanent settlers in the country. It should be noted that as in Holland, so in England also, there were two classes of Jews. The German and Polish, called the Ashkenazi, and the Spanish and Portuguese. These were known as the Safardim. It said these agree in their religious opinions, but in other matters differ considerably from each other. And it is said that intermarriages between them were for a long time rare. The German and Polish Jews did not settle in England for a generation later. They were, on the whole, inferior in respect of culture and education, as well as less wealthy than their Spanish brethren. So I'm not going to go through all of this. Just wanted to show that now we have history showing us the Ashkenazi Jews alongside the Sephardic Jews. In this instance, when they're mentioned together, slavery has been going on for 200 years. Ashkenazi Jews are made up of the Polish and the German Jews. So where does history give an account of where these German Jews come from? The history of the Jews from the revolt against the Zendik 511 CE to the capture of St. John d'Acre by the Mahometans in 1291 CE. The Jews of Germany are to be regarded merely as colonies of Frankish Jews, and such of them as lived in Austrasia, a province subject to the Merovingian kings, share the same fate as their brethren in France. So remember we talked about how in France they had no regard for how terribly they treated the Jews. Anybody who killed a Jew didn't have to answer for it, and judges and magistrates were encouraged to even turn a blind eye to any such matter. According to the Chronicle, the most ancient Jews in the Rhine district are said to have been the descendants of legionaries who took part in the destruction of the temple. From the vast horde of Jewish prisoners, the Vigiani had chosen the most beautiful women, had brought them back to their stations on the shores of the Rhine and the Main, and had compelled them to minister to the satisfaction of their desires. The children thus begotten of Jewish and Germanic parents were brought up by their mothers in the Jewish faith, their fathers not troubling themselves about them. It is these children who are said to have been the founders of the first Jewish communities between Worms and Nantes. It is certain that a Jewish congregation existed in the Roman colony, the city of Cologne, long before Christianity had been raised to power by Constantine. Children born to a Jewish mother is how they become Jews. And this writing just told us, or tells us, where that principle first originated. Where one of the major histories should be noted. Because the Rothschilds descend from these German Jews. The Rothschild family descends from these German Jews. It says, I went and I jumped on Google AI and I asked Google, I said, when did the Rothschild family become Jews? And the return was that the Rothschild family did not convert to Judaism. They have always been Jewish. Their recorded lineage traceably begins in the Jewish ghetto in Judengasse of Frankfurt, Germany, where they lived as a Jewish family for centuries before achieving global prominence. It says the Frankfurter Judengasse, or Jews Lane, was a Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt and one of the earliest ghettos in Germany. It existed from 1462 until 1811 and was home to Germany's largest Jewish community in early modern times. At the end of the 19th century, most of the buildings in the Judengasse were demolished. The area suffered major destruction during World War II, and reconstruction left no visible signs of the ghetto in today's townscape of Frankfurt. Initially, some 15 families of about 110 members lived in Frankfurt's Judengasse when they were forcibly removed from the city and relocated to the ghetto by decree of Friedrich III in 1462. By the 16th century, the number of inhabitants rose to over 3,000, living in 195 houses. The ghetto had one of the highest population densities in Europe. Contemporary documents describe it as narrow, oppressive, and dirty. Ghettos were common in Europe. The Jews were in ghettos from ages ago. We are given a history that makes us look at history from a short-sighted view. We never really take a gander into history or peek into history with a well-rounded view of everything that happened, not only in America, but prior to the settlement of America. The ghettos are not something that just popped up in America. It's very coincidental that the people who inhabit the ghettos in America are the black people. From the beginning of time, the people who inhabit the ghettos have been black people. Certain places now, those ghettos are just, popular places where prominent black heroes and sheroes come from, and they're staples in the black community. But we don't really get to associate those histories. We don't really get to kind of look at where those things come from. So I think it's good to make mention here that these ghettos were in Germany. Now, again, I was talking about the Rothschild family. Now, we can clearly see that the Rothschild's family is a European family. But there's I think something that is good to take a look at here. This paper is entitled "The History of African Gene Flow into Southern Europeans, Levantines, and Jews." And I'm just going to read the abstract. It says, the previous genetic studies have suggested a history of sub-Saharan African gene flow into some West Europe, Eurasian populations after the initial dispersal out of Africa that occurred at least 45,000 years ago. However, there has been no accurate characterization of the proportion of mixture or of its date. We analyze genome-wide polymorphism data from over 40 West Eurasian groups to show that almost all Southern Europeans have inherited 1% to 3% African ancestry, with an average admixture date of around 55 generations ago. Consistent with North African gene flow at the end of the Roman Empire and subsequent Arab migrations. I apologize, I didn't mean to say it like that, but subsequent Arab migrations. Levantine groups harbor 4% to 15% African ancestry, with an average admixture date of about 32 generations ago, consistent with close political, economic, and cultural links with Egypt in the late Middle Ages. We also detect 3% to 5% of sub-Saharan African ancestry in all 8 of the diverse Jewish populations that we analyzed. For the Jewish admixture, we obtained the average estimated date of about 72 generations. This may reflect descent of these groups from a common ancestral population that already had some African ancestry prior to the Jewish diaspora. So, Southern Europeans are the Italians. Those races. Now, after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, Jews were taken into slavery in Rome. When we look at these papers, and it tells us that there's sub-Saharan African DNA in Southern Europe, and we look at the fact that there were Jews taken into slavery in Rome after 70 AD, then we go further and we look and see that a lot of those Jewish people that were in Rome migrated from Italy into Germany. So when we're talking about the Rothschilds, when we're talking about the ghetto in Germany, when we're talking about those Jewish women, the most beautiful Jewish women who were taken into Germany on the Rhine, and these German soldiers impregnated them, I'll say it that way, and then left them to raise the children on their own, it's not far-fetched to believe that these German Jews ultimately have African or sub-Saharan African specifically DNA. I think it's important to make note that this propaganda campaign by Hitler, I remember back in around 2017, this was circulating very, very heavily. This was something that many of the Black Hebrew Israelites were circulating this image quite heavily, because the trope was that Hitler knew who the Jews were, and he was saying that the European Jews were fake Jews. And this again is why I believe that the Ashkenazi Jews do deserve respect. Granted, our group went through slavery, but the Ashkenazi Jews deserve respect for the things that they endured in Europe. Because when we look at what this says here, a propaganda illustration taken from a Nazi short film, the caption reads in German, "The Jew is a bastard." The illustration linked Jews with other people the Nazi considered inferior: Orientals, Blacks, Mongols, and East Africans. But the point that they were making is that these Ashkenazi Jews descended from these Afro-Asiatic Black Negro Jews, and that they were bastards. So this is a well-known history. Hitler was German, so he was calling these Ashkenazi Jews bastards because they were left by their fathers to be raised by these Jewish mothers, and that they descend from these Black Jews who had been in Europe throughout history. Now again, this is not to sensationalize things. This is just connecting those dots. This is just putting things together so that we can give a full history. People were claiming Hitler knew who the Jews were, and he was saying that the white Ashkenazi Jews were imposters, but no. He was saying that these Jews, that they descend from the Jews that had been expelled previously, and that their blood was still in Europe, and that they needed to be exterminated. So this wasn't a campaign to say, hip hip hooray, we know who the real Jews are. This was a propaganda effort to turn the Europeans against those Ashkenazi Jews. The Ashkenazi Jews didn't have of Jewish look that have been prosecuted or persecuted from the 1400s through slavery. This is not an attempt to say that one is better than the other. This is just an attempt to draw the lines together to show how more connected we are than we are separated. And if you've enjoyed this lesson and the walk through history and DNA, I do encourage you to like and share this video. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment in the comment section. You know, let's have the discussion. But again, thank you for joining me here at the Ready Brew. I really do appreciate you. Peace.